Now this week, I don't know if it was this week, it was a few different days, but depending on which one you're looking at, either January 12, 13, 17 or 19 was Quitters Day. You know what Quitters Day is? It's not quitting smoking or anything like that. It's the date when most people have given up their New Year's resolutions. And a social network for athletes called Strava, it found that around 80% of people who made New Year's resolutions have tapped out by the second week of January. And they actually refined it a bit further, and they said that this was deducing it from available 800 million user-logged activities for the year. Okay, and they actually pinpointed that the second Friday in January is the fateful day where most quitters begin to decline. The main reason involves, main resolutions involve exercise, eating habits and weight loss. Okay, those three deadly sins were the ones. So other studies have found that 2/3 of people abandon their New Year's resolutions within 1 month. So if you have, you're in good company. You're in good company. Now I made one New Year's resolution, and that was I'm going to only try and preach up to 30 minutes maximum, because sometimes I go too long. I was talking to somebody this week. It's actually harder to prepare a shorter sermon than a longer one. It might be counterintuitive, but it's actually harder to cut back the time rather than preaching a longer sermon. And I can be a bit long-winded. It's not good. So it's 11:30, so we'll see if I keep it or not today on the first Sabbath preaching. So, yeah, probably two or three times in a year, we think about time and the passing of time. One, of course, is birthdays, okay, when we add another year to our lives. So it's one time that we think about, wow, the time is passing, the time is going. Second time is probably anniversaries. Okay, different anniversaries. Anniversaries, typically of marriage, of course, is the popular one, but also anniversaries when people die as well. We tend to remember those as well. And then New Year's Day. New Year's Day is another time that we think about the passing of time. And so, yeah, we're near the beginning of the year, not quite at the beginning, but yeah, near the beginning of the year. And the message I prepared is based on a psalm. And of course, we're looking at the Psalms this quarter in our lesson study. So I've chosen a psalm I did last year as well. And this psalm is a special one, actually. It was written by Moses. Okay, I didn't even know Moses had written a psalm, but he did. And he actually wrote a couple of other songs in the first 5 books of the Bible. But he actually wrote one of the psalms as one. Only one. So out of 150 psalms in the book of Psalms, Moses wrote one of them. So it's the oldest psalm. We believe it's the oldest psalm. It is believed that Moses wrote Psalms 90 after the events of Numbers chapter 20. Wow. After the events of Numbers chapter 20, which had 3 significant events there in Numbers chapter 20. The first event that's listed was the death of Moses' sister Miriam. Okay, so his sister Miriam had died, the prophetess. She was the sister who watched over Moses when he was an infant, and the parents were hiding him from the decree that all the male children should be killed of the Hebrews. And so it was his sister who kept watch over him when he was in the boat, in the little ark on the river. The second major event was his older brother Aaron died as well. So this all happened in Numbers chapter 20. So Aaron was his older brother and closest confidant. The third major event was that Moses himself was barred from entering the land of the promised land because of of him and Aaron getting angry at the people and not trusting in God and hit the rock instead of speaking to it. He was barred. They were barred from entry. And so these three big events happened in Numbers chapter 20. And it's believed that it was after these three events that Moses wrote Psalms chapter 90, the one that we're going to look at today. So, Moses was the man who did not want to be sent to Egypt because he was not good with words, in his own words. But God gave him the power to develop from a stuttering shepherd into a national leader who was able to form a bunch of slaves into a nation. No small tasks. Through his courage, humility, and wisdom. And while there were many great prophets that came after Moses through the kings and all of that in that time span, it would be more than 1,000 years until a prophet, one greater than Moses, appeared, which was Jesus Christ. So he's quite a man. He's quite a man. What might a man like Moses have to say to us near the beginning of another year? I think it'd be worthwhile to listen to somebody like that. Such a great man, someone who endured two people dying, his brother and his sister dying, being barred from the promised land after all of putting up with for 40 odd years. What might he write that could be relevant for us today? Well, he wrote Psalm chapter 90, and what I'd like today is for us to do a responsive reading. Okay, so you can also, we'll read together the whole of the Psalm chapter 90. And we'll be covering part of it today and part of it in the next sermon. So anyway, let's read together. So I'll read the one in regular font, and you read it in bold font. It'll be up on the board, so it'll be up on the screen, so you won't have to look it up or anything like that. Okay, Lord, through all the generations, you have been our home. Before the mountains were born, before you gave birth to the earth and the world, from beginning to end, you are God. Let's join together. You turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. Those at home can also say it as well. For you, 1,000 years are as a passing day, as brief as a few night hours. Together. You sweep people away like dreams that disappear. They are like grass that springs up in the morning. In the morning it blooms and flourishes, but by evening it is dry and withered. We wither beneath your anger. We are overwhelmed by your fury. You spread out our sins before you, our secret sins, and you see them all. We live our lives beneath your wrath, ending our years with a groan. 70 years are given to us. Some even live to 80, but even the best years are filled with pain and trouble. Soon they disappear and we fly away. Who can comprehend the power of your anger? Your wrath is as awesome as the fear you deserve. Teach us to realize the brevity of life so that we may grow in wisdom. O Lord, come back to us. How long will you delay? Take pity on your servants. Satisfy us each morning with your unfailing love, so we may sing for joy to the end of our lives. Give us gladness in proportion to our former misery. Replace the evil years with good. Let us, your servants, see your work again. Let our children see your glory. And may the Lord our God show us his approval and make our efforts successful. Yes, make our efforts successful. So that's the whole psalm that is written in the book of Psalms by Moses, okay, after these three tumultuous events. And I think just reading through it, we got a bit of a feel for some of the themes, that we're going to be looking at that came through in that particular psalm. Okay, let's begin doing something that I rarely ever do, and that's put up the text on the overhead. I usually don't, because I prefer people to look it up in the Bible, but because we're sort of having a bit of an in-depth look, I'll be putting it up on the screen today. But it won't be always this way. That was not a New Year's resolution to put up the texts on the screen. Okay, 91 and 2. Says, Lord, through all the generations, you have been our home. Before the mountains were born, before you gave birth to the earth and the world from beginning to end, you are our God. It's interesting, after quite a life that Moses had, with all the things that happened with the Israelites, leading them out of Egypt and running out of water and running out of food and the manna and all of that, and the people complaining and everything else. The first thing that Moses thinks of and talks about is God. The very first thing he talks about is God. Not about himself, not about the people, not about all he's been through. His focus is on God. He begins by using the imagery of God as a home. You have been our home. And in fact, the Hebrew word for home is often used for refuge. Okay, it's often used for refuge. So it could have been, you have been our refuge. He could have also have been translated. A refuge is a place where you are safe in times of need. And so God was their home and refuge through all the generations. And so this gives a sense of stability to them, a solid foundation. And this was important to communicate to the people, because the people that were left, the ones who hadn't died, the only leader they had ever known was Moses. They had grown up, only Moses was their leader, and he was going to be passing away. And so Moses begins by talking about God. God is their home. God is their refuge. God is their stability. And that was the important message you wanted to get across at the very beginning to the people. And he goes back even further, not just back to home, but even before the mountains were born, before gave birth to the earth. So even before the beginning of this earth, Moses is establishing about who God is. God was around all that time. Now in the NLT, it's translated from beginning to end, you are God. Probably more accurate is some other translations, from everlasting to everlasting. Now, from everlasting in the past to everlasting in the future is sort of more the nuance that's there. So Moses is really beginning with God and who he is. The eternal God, the home or the refuge of Israel, and for us as well. But then, as we read, it takes a jarring about face in the next verse. Okay, so we hear about the eternity of God, from everlasting to everlasting, the focus. So then he turns to us, then he turns to people as not good. Okay, just the spoiler alert. Verse 3, you turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. Wow, quite a contrast, and we'll see this a few times between God and us, about God and us. We not only go back to dust, it says we return to dust. Now that means when you return to something, that's what you were before. And that's what we were before. We were created from dust. And so he says, turn back to dust, return to dust. Quite a difference between what God is, the eternal, the mountains, the refuge, the home before creation, and us as mere mortals turning to dust. In ancient Rome, after a great military victory, there would be a parade for the general or for the leader or for the victor. And his face was painted red, as you can see there. And this was to symbolise the intimate connection or contact with the Roman god Jupiter. And that's where the procession, the Temple of Jupiter, was the procession where they actually was the destination. And the victors were considered to be close to the god, that they were seen as mediators between God and the people. So they've had a great victory, they're in a parade, all the people are there cheering them on, how good they are, their faces red, indicating their connection with the gods as a mediator. However, there was also something interesting during this parade. During this parade, the victor's slave, or charioteer, was known as the auriga. And he would hold the crown above the head. You can see that he's holding the crown above him, okay, as he's going along. And every now and again, this slave, the auriga, would whisper the words in the victor's ear. And those words were, memento homo. Remember, you are only a man. You are only mortal. Or memento mori. Remember, you will die. So even during a parade, even when all the adulation of the people, that slave would be whispering in the ear of the person, remember, you are mortal. You will die. And so even in ancient Rome, they had this part of this victory was to remind the person that, hey, you're going to die one day. You are mortal. And that's what's happening in this psalm as well. After dwelling on the greatness of God, switches to how we are mortal. Well, it switches again, okay? It switches again back to God. For 1,000 years are as a passing day, as brief as a few night hours. So again, the eternity of God, we're seeing this contrast in this psalm between God and us. And so he says 1,000 years is a passing day. Now, it's not meant to be taken literally. Some have unfortunately taken this literally and applied it to prophecy. That somehow the 7 days of creation means there's going to be 7,000 years when Jesus returns. This is poetry, okay? This is poetry. It's not meant to be taken literally or anything like that. So yeah, 1,000 years like a passing day, and in fact it says even shorter, a few night hours, a watch of the night. You know, the few hours before dawn is what it's referring to. So 1,000 years for God is like a few hours before dawn. Again, the contrast between the two. Back again to us. You sweep people away like dreams that disappear. They are like grass that springs up in the morning. In the morning it blooms and flourishes, but by the evening it is dried and withered. I'm sure we've all experienced about dreams. You know, we're involved in a dream and it seems like it's going a long time and we wake up and within a minute or two we've forgotten the dream. The dream's gone. Can't remember, or might be able to remember one or two things, but you know, the dream is basically forgotten what it is. Even if we still have the feeling of, of being afraid or whatever, hearts are racing, the details are forgotten. And God says that's what our lives are like. Our lives are like a dream where we have a dream for a while and then we forget about it. The brevity of time. And this is further reinforced by comparing it to the grass that blooms in the morning, all fresh and green, but by the evening it's withered. It's just withered. And so that's our lives as well. Next verse, we wither beneath your anger. We are overwhelmed by your fury. You spread out our sins before you, our secret sins, and you see them all. We live our lives beneath your wrath, ending our years with a groan. Probably not so nice, is it? We like to think about or talk about the wrath of God. It's a topic that sometimes we like to avoid or don't really want to talk about. And we like to talk about the love of God, and of course we should. But also, we need to recognise the wrath of God as well. Remember one professor I had, he used to say to us, now, don't just preach about the love of God, preach about the wrath of God sometimes. And believe me, he was a professor who put the fear of God in us. With his lecturing and that, man, he really had high standards and stuff. But yeah, he said, don't just preach about the love of God, preach about the wrath of God sometimes too. And here in this psalm that talks about, we'll see the love of God and everything else, but Moses also talks about the wrath of God. And as I say, it's a topic that can sometimes be uncomfortable, even for Christians to want to talk about. In fact, I looked up on YouTube for some songs on Psalms 90 to see how they would handle this section. Okay, and I did find a couple of songs that were in the title Psalms 90 and went through various parts of it. So I thought, I wonder what they're going to say about this part. And very interesting, saw this pattern of not really wanting to talk about the wrath of God. One song said, the wrath of God poured for sin on Jesus crucified. That's not the context in here. Okay, that's not the context. Now, of course, that's true, but that's not what it's talking about here in Psalm chapter 90. When the singer was saying, okay, I'm going to talk about Psalm 90, going through each verse, then when he came to this section on God's wrath, he said, it's talking about God's wrath against sin and how we will experience trouble in this world because of sin, but God shelters us. Again, completely wrong in the context, completely wrong. Another song said, oh God, when joy and tragedy collide and loss reminds us life is but a sigh. Okay, that's all nice, but it's not what Moses is talking about. Moses was talking about the people experienced the wrath of God. For 40 years, they were wandering in the desert. They were under the wrath of God. They were wandering in the desert for 40 years. This wasn't some abstract thing that happened. Why were they wandering in the desert? Because they didn't trust God and didn't obey him on the border of the promised land. They said no. They listened to the report of the 10 spies and said, we're not going. And they even said, it'd be better if we died in the desert or we died in Egypt than go into that land and be killed. And so because of that, and they even appointed other leaders to lead them back to Egypt. So the wrath of God was not some abstract thing. It wasn't poured out on Jesus or anything like that. It was poured out on the people. It was poured out on the people. And so that's why Moses said, we are living our lives beneath your wrath, ending our years with a groan. Because the whole generation died in the desert. A whole generation died in that 40 years. Okay? It was very real. It wasn't some abstract thing, that God shelters us or anything like that from sin. This was the direct result of their sin. Now, it was their rebellion. It wasn't just doing something wrong or whatever. It was rebellion against God. And they were under his wrath. There's no ifs, buts, or maybes about that. And so we need to take seriously about the wrath of God. In fact, God couldn't lead them into the promised land at that time. It would have been disastrous if he had led them into the promised land when they didn't trust him and would not follow him. And so, the only solution was, okay, wander in the desert for 40 years. The whole generation will die out and then be able to lead into the promised land. So, we need, this psalm is also telling us about the seriousness of sin. The seriousness of sin. That it's not to be looked at lightly. Because, sometimes we do reap the consequences in this life. And they reap the consequences. They got what they asked for. God honoured their choice. Okay, you want to die in the desert? Your choice. Your choice. It wasn't something God imposed on the people and said, well, you didn't obey me, so this is what's going to happen. I'm going to do this to you. No. They said it'd be better if we died in the desert than to take the promised land. And so, as it says there, you spread our sins before you, our secret sins. You see them all. Moses is from experience saying, hey, treat sin seriously. Treat sin seriously. Of course, we are saved by grace. Absolutely. Absolutely, we are, as Christians, saved by grace. No question. But as Christians, we are to live in a different way. We are to live in a different way and honour our commitment as Christians. So this doesn't take away the certainty of grace and being saved. But it does point out that, hey, there can be consequences. And that doesn't mean that they're all lost. Okay? It doesn't mean that that whole generation is not going to be in heaven. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that on this earth, they suffered the consequences and they were under God's wrath. And so, sometimes we need to know about God's wrath, not just about his love. Back to us, so it continues. 70 years are given to us. Some even live to 80, but even the best years are filled with pain and trouble. Soon they disappear and they fly away. Another cheery note for us. Especially I'm turning 61 this year. I'm thinking, oh dear, getting closer to 70 than I'd like. Also to 80. And nowadays it's not uncommon to get to 80 as well. But they're brief and they fly away. They just fly away. Let's just think about a typical lifetime, 70 or 80 years. Growing up is about 18 years, out of that time. So that leaves about 52 years if we make it to 70, or 62 years if we make it to 80. Now, if we sleep 8 hours a day, that means we'll be sleeping 17 years, if we have a 70-year lifespan, or 21 years if we have an 80-year lifespan. So that means that we're awake 35 years. This is both day and night. Or 41 years. So we've got 35 to 41 years left. Part of that time must be spent eating meals, building families, social relationships, working out jobs, and figuring out our tax returns. We've got to do all of that in those few short years. Isn't life short when you look at it that way? 35 or 41 years. That's it. That's it in terms of awake time as an adult. When we think about it like that. Time is an equal opportunity employer. We hear about the gender gap and the class gap. Well, time doesn't have any of that. Each of us has the same number of hours and minutes every day. 1,440 minutes in a day, 168 hours in a week. Each day we have the same amount of time to invest. Time allows no balances to carry over till tomorrow. There's no overdrafts. We cannot hoard time to spend it another day. And so, the brevity of life. When I saw these things, when I worked some of it out, I thought, oh dear, less time than I thought. Back to God's anger. Who can comprehend the power of your anger? Your wrath is as awesome as your fear deserves. So again, Moses was not shy about talking about the wrath of God as well as the love of God, which we'll be seeing in the second half. He brings up this topic again. And that's one of the values of reading through chapters and books of the Bible. You get to see the whole picture rather than picking a verse here and a verse there that we like. Okay, and remember the context of 40 years wandering in the desert because of their rebellion. And so we reach the pivot point, which I'll be expanding on in the next sermon. Teach us to realise the brevity of life so that we may grow in wisdom. This is the pivotal point in this psalm. Moses is saying to the people, this is someone who lived more than 100 years. I wrote it down somewhere. Yet he would say, teach us to realise the brevity of life, that we may grow in wisdom. And so we'll be continuing to look at this psalm next time. And it's 30 minutes. How good's that? But anyway, we haven't finished yet. I'd like for us to read together. Teach us to realise the brevity of life so that we may grow in wisdom. I'll just close with this poem. When I was a babe and wept and slept, time crept. When I was a boy and laughed and talked, time walked. Then when the years saw me a man, time ran. But as I grew, as older I grew, time flew. Soon as I journey on, I'll find time gone. May Christ have saved my soul by then. Amen. Now have our closing hymn, which is O God, our help.